Wood products are a large export earner, contributing around $5 billion to New Zealand's economy, with managed forests covering around 7% of our land area. And improving plantation forest productivity by investing in tree breeding and improvement has a long history here. The ArborGen Nursery at Te Teko in Eastern Bay of Plenty specialises in producing improved genetics and varietals of radiata pine stocks for forestry planting.
ArborGen here in New Zealand is the largest grower and producer of planting stock for the forestry sector in New Zealand, and we've also got a reasonable market share in southeastern Australia. Here in New Zealand we grow around 20 million tree stocks annually, which is something in the region of 40% of the typical planting requirement in a given year. We've got 6 nurseries from Kaikoui in the north all the way down to Edendale. The nursery here at Te Teko is actually our smallest nursery. It does around 2 million trees a year of the 20 million or so that we produce annually. And it's unique in the sense that it's completely containerised stock, where we're basically putting seedlings or cuttings into specialised trays with planting media, as opposed to planting them in formed beds in the nursery, which is the bulk of our production here in New Zealand. Forestry species has a very long history in New Zealand. There's been formal programs of genetic improvement since, at least the 1950s, and we've done a number of generations of improvement, and that's a big part also of what we do here at ArborGen. We have our own tree breeding and improvement program, which complements what the industry does to deploy improved radiata pine material for forest owners. Varietals are basically the best of the best in terms of the radiata pine trees that we produce. Varietals are genetically identical, so effectively it's a cloning process, so similar to vegetative reproduction like cuttings. So you've got that consistency because you've got genetically identical trees. The identification is a relatively long-term process to ensure that you've got varietals that are appropriate for the different geographic regions of New Zealand and the different forest environments that you encounter. You've got to have a fairly large-scale breeding and development and trial program. So we've actually got around 3,000 individual varietals as testers spread across 90 trial sites that cover pretty much all the major geographic forest growing regions of New Zealand. So it's quite a large program, and in terms of the timescale, it does take a long time till trees get to harvest age. 28 to 32 years is typical for radiata pine in New Zealand, but you can get a pretty good idea of the characteristics of a tree at 5 years for some wood properties and at 8 years for others. So after 8 years, we've got a pretty good idea of how that tree is going to perform at harvest. It is a constant improvement process, so at any one time we tend to have a suite of around 10 production varietals, and that's come down from the 3,000 in test. So it is an ongoing process of continuous improvement, and the individuals that we're selecting and reproducing from that program are changing, so they are getting refreshed, they are getting better. The things that forest owners are looking for are they want straighter trees, they want faster growing trees, they want trees with improved properties, and all of those different characteristics or traits, we're seeing improvement over time.
Producing varietals is really a two-stage process. It firstly starts with green cones that we receive from our seed orchard. In our lab, they remove the immature embryos out of the cones. They get processed in the lab and produce embryonic tissue. Those little embryos later get turned into the little plantlets that grow on and become our mother plants for producing cuttings from. This whole process takes about 12 months, from removing it from the green cone to having a plantlet that can be transferred to the greenhouse. It's quite an artificial process through the lab. It takes quite a while, so we've got very specialised methods and processes that we apply to the embryos to get them through that process. This part of the process is really the start of the varietal production system we have. This is where we annually get our mother plant stock from to replenish the ageing mums. This is the varietals that's already been through our tester system, and they are being produced now in large quantities, so we can actually produce them in large volumes for the forestry customers. These will be the mums for us for next year and the years following on to that.
At the moment in New Zealand, around 50 million trees a year are grown and planted. Something of that sort of order has been the norm over the last few years. By the standards of previous decades, that's actually quite low. The main driver for that has been, by historical standards, very small amounts of new planting of forests. But I think, having said that, the industry is quite nicely poised at the moment. There's a few stars aligning. There is a large amount of harvesting and potential replanting that needs to be done after a big surge of planting in the early to mid 1990s. So a lot of that inventory is coming up for harvest age and will need to be replanted. And I think there's a growing appreciation too of the not only economic contributions that forestry makes. It's a $5 billion income sector annually and employs 20,000 people, so very important economically. But it also has huge benefits environmentally with absorption of greenhouse gases, and there's a growing appreciation, I think, that it's complementary to some of our other land uses here in New Zealand, such as the dairy sector, for example. So I think the future's looking pretty good.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.